At my husband's funeral, my daughter asked if I was going to sell everything and move to a home. I hadn't even buried him yet. If you're watching this, subscribe to the channel now and comment where you're watching from. This is my story. I stood motionless as they lowered Robert's casket into the ground. 35 years of marriage reduced to a mahogany box and a pile of freshly dug earth. The autumn wind cut through my black dress, but I barely felt it. The pain of losing him to pancreatic cancer after 14 brutal months had left me numb to everything else. Mom. Diane's manicured hand gripped my elbow, pulling me away from the other mourners. My daughter's face, so much like Robert's, was set in what I recognized as her practical expression. At 32, she'd perfected it. "Have you thought about selling the house? Moving to a retirement community?" she asked, her voice hushed but urgent. "It would be easier for you." I stared at her, unable to form words. Robert's body wasn't even in the ground yet. "Diane has a point, Mom." Eric appeared at my other side, his suit expensive but rumpled. "That house is too big for you alone." Something in their exchanged glance made my stomach tighten. A quick, conspiratorial look I wasn't meant to see. At the reception, I drifted between groups of mourners in our Oakwood Hills funeral home, accepting condolences with mechanical nods. That's when I heard it. Eric's voice from the hallway, speaking in low, excited tones. "Johnson says the property values in that neighborhood have jumped 20% in just 2 years. If we list it in spring..." I froze, recognizing the other voice as Mike Pearson, our local real estate agent. "Your mother will need convincing," Mike replied. "People get attached to family homes." "Leave that to us," Diane interjected. "She's overwhelmed right now. Suggestible." That night I sat alone in our bedroom. Mine alone now, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared life. I clutched Robert's pillow to my face, inhaling his fading scent. My tears weren't just for him anymore, but for the shattering realization that to my children, I'd already become invisible, a problem to solve, an asset to liquidate. I caught my reflection in the vanity mirror, seeing a stranger, a hollow-eyed woman with silver-streaked hair, shoulders curved inward with grief. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. "What am I supposed to do now, Robert?" I whispered to the empty room. The silence that answered was deafening. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the shadows crawl across our bedroom ceiling, wondering how I'd become so insignificant in the eyes of the very people I'd given everything to create. The law office of Patterson and Associates smelled of leather and lemon polish. I sat rigidly in an antique chair, watching my children fidget across from me. 2 weeks had passed since the funeral, but the wound felt just as fresh. Eric checked his watch repeatedly. My son had abandoned a stable banking position 10 years ago for investment opportunities that never seemed to materialize. Yet somehow, Heelways had money for custom suits and leased luxury cars. Diane scrolled through her phone, occasionally angling it to capture her solemn face against the mahogany bookshelves. Probably content for her lifestyle channel, I thought bitterly. My former kindergarten teacher had traded her passion for education to chase influencer fame and free products. When had they changed so much? When had material things become their only measure of success? "Let's begin," Mr. Patterson said, adjusting his reading glasses. He'd been Robert's friend for decades, yet today his familiar face was a professional mask. I expected a simple reading. Instead, the document unveiled Robert's final surprise. "The majority of assets will remain with Martha Sullivan," Mr. Patterson read. "A trust fund has been established for Eric and Diane Sullivan, with conditions overseen by independent administrator William Jenkins." "What conditions?" Diane's voice cracked with indignation. She dropped her phone into her designer handbag. "That's ridiculous. We need the money now." "Mr. Patterson looked at her over his glasses. "The conditions are confidential between your father and Mr. Jenkins, as permitted under Connecticut's discretionary trust laws. Mr. Jenkins will monitor compliance regularly." I felt a shockwave of realization. There was more to this arrangement than I knew. Robert had planned something I wasn't privy to. "This is bullshit," Eric muttered, his polished veneer cracking. Later, I lingered in the parking lot, fumbling with my car keys when I heard them. "She won't last long anyway," Eric said, his voice carrying in the cold October air. "We need to convince her to sell that house." We can't wait years until she decides. My hands trembled so violently I dropped my keys. I wasn't just invisible to them. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle to be removed. I drove home with white knuckles on the steering wheel, the trust revealing itself for what it was, not just financial planning, but Robert's final attempt to protect me. Late October brought relentless rain that matched my mood. I'd been avoiding Robert's office, but something pulled me there a month after his funeral. The room remained exactly as he'd left it, financial journals stacked neatly, family photos arranged precisely on his desk. I ran my fingers along his bookshelf, stopping at a hollowed-out book I'd given him years ago as a novelty gift. I'd never seen him use it. Curious, I pulled it down, surprised by its weight. Inside was a small key I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I identified what it might open, the home safe in the closet that I'd always assumed held tax documents. When the lock clicked open, I found instead a leather journal, banking statements, and several unsealed envelopes. I settled into Robert's chair and opened the journal with trembling hands. The entries were sporadic, observations about our children written in Robert's precise handwriting. March 15th, 2022. Eric borrowed another $5,000. Claims it's for a tech startup investment, the same story as last time and the time before. July 8th, 2023. Diane mentioned wanting to start a boutique with Thomas. She hasn't told James, concerning that she's meeting with her ex-boyfriend behind her husband's back. September 30th, 2023. Their inheritance from my parents is likely gone. Neither will discuss their finances openly anymore. I felt my chest tighten. These weren't just random thoughts. They were a record of growing concern. A letter addressed to me was dated shortly after Robert's diagnosis. Martha, if you're reading this, I didn't have the courage to burden you with these worries during my illness. I feared adding stress to our final months together. I'm concerned about the path Eric and Diane have chosen. Speak with William Jenkins. He has instructions if our children become difficult. I've always tried to protect you, perhaps too much. But you're stronger than you know. The letter ended abruptly, as if he'd planned to add more but never return to it. I sat in his chair until darkness fell, piecing together the fragments of truth he'd left behind. Robert had seen what I'd been blind to. Our children's transformation from people with dreams and values to individuals consumed by material acquisition. And somehow, he'd tried to protect me even as he faced his own mortality. I carefully replaced everything except the letter, which I folded into my pocket. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt something beyond grief stirring within me. A quiet determination to understand what he'd been trying to tell me. More wine, Martha? Susan Lambert's voice dripped with false sympathy as she held the bottle over my glass. My supposed friend of 25 years had positioned herself conspicuously close to my children at Diane's Christmas dinner. Just a little, I murmured, watching how Susan's eyes darted between Eric and Diane with hungry complicity. We'd worked together at the local bank until retirement, but since Robert's illness, she'd revealed a competitive, almost envious streak regarding my family's financial standing. December had brought snow and forced socializing. I sat at my daughter's immaculate dining table, surrounded by holiday decorations that looked straight from a catalog shoot. James, Diane's husband, offered me a tight smile. Eric's latest girlfriend, Vanessa, at least 10 years his junior, looked bored. "We were just discussing your situation, Martha," Susan said loudly. My situation. As if widowhood were a condition to be managed. "The housing market is hot right now," Eric added, "especially for properties like yours in established neighborhoods." "I know an excellent realtor who specializes in downsizing scenarios," Susan chimed in. I attempted to change the subject. "I've been thinking about taking a trip in the spring, maybe to that coastal town Robert and I always talked about visiting." 5 faces turned to me with identical expressions of alarm. "Don't you think it's too soon for that, Mom?" Eric's voice had the same tone he'd use with a confused child. "Maybe we should look into getting an evaluation," Diane whispered to James, loud enough for me to hear. "Depression can manifest as impulsive behavior in seniors." Seniors. At 58, I'd been relegated to a generic category of declining relevance. "I'm not depressed," I said firmly. "I'm grieving. There's a difference." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table before conversation resumed around me, about me, without me. I became background noise in the story of my own life. Later, as I prepared to leave, I overheard Susan in the kitchen with Diane. "Your mother needs structure, dear. My aunt was the same way after my uncle passed. Started talking about cruises and art classes. Next thing you know, she'd given half her savings to some scammer." I drove home through swirling snow, the Christmas lights blurring through my tears. I wasn't just invisible anymore. I was being actively diminished. My agency stripped away word by word. That night, I retrieved Robert's letter from my bedside drawer and read it again. "Speak with William Jenkins," he'd written. The time had come to find out exactly what my husband had planned. Robert was worried this might happen. William Jenkins stirred his coffee methodically, his expression sympathetic but measured. We sat in a quiet corner of Hampton's cafe, away from potential eavesdroppers. January sunshine streamed through the windows, deceptively cheerful against the cold reality of my situation. "He noticed changes in their behavior over the last few years," Jenkins continued. "The way they responded to financial boundaries, their growing sense of entitlement." I wrapped my hands around my mug, absorbing its warmth. Why didn't he tell me? He tried, in his way. But Robert always wanted to protect you from difficult truths. Jenkins pulled out a business card. "He arranged for you to have independent legal counsel if needed. Evelyn Taylor specializes in elder protection law." Elder protection. The term stung, yet I recognized its necessity. "What exactly did Robert set up?" I asked. "A protective framework, resources to ensure you wouldn't face this alone." Jenkins leaned forward. "Martha, you worked in HR for 15 years before focusing on family. You have skills you haven't used in a while." Robert knew that. Something awakened in me. Professional instincts long dormant. That afternoon, I called Evelyn Taylor and scheduled a consultation. Over the next few weeks, I began to play a subtle game. When Diane dropped by unexpectedly, I left retirement community brochures visible on the coffee table. "I've been thinking about what you said," I mentioned casually. "It might be easier to live somewhere smaller." The bait was taken immediately. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Glad you're seeing reason about the house, Mom. I know a great appraiser." After my second meeting with Evelyn, I hired Barbara Chen, a private investigator she recommended. "This will take time," Barbara warned. "We need to build a complete picture without alerting them." I nodded, feeling a strange calm. "I have time." That night, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Protection Plan. For the first time since Robert's diagnosis, I felt a sense of purpose, not just reaction, but action. The game had changed, and so had I. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing how I stood straighter now, how the fog of grief had begun to lift from my eyes. "I hear you, Robert," I whispered. "I understand what you were trying to tell me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan." Leonard Goldman's handshake was firm, his reputation as a formidable elder law attorney well earned. March sunlight filtered through my living room windows as we reviewed the documents Evelyn had prepared. "The protective trust structure is excellent," he noted, "but we should add these additional safeguards." The doorbell rang unexpectedly. I glanced at my watch. Right on schedule. Leonard raised an eyebrow as I moved to answer it. Eric and Diane stood on the porch, their surprise visit perfectly timed thanks to Susan's predictable gossip network. Their eyes widened at the sight of the unfamiliar luxury sedan in my driveway. "Mom, we were just in the neighborhood," Diane began, then stopped short when she spotted Leonard in his impeccable suit, documents spread across the coffee table. "Come in," I said pleasantly. "I'd like you to meet Leonard Goldman, my new attorney who specializes in estate planning." The color drained from Eric's face. "Estate planning? Please join us," Leonard offered with professional courtesy that revealed nothing. They declined awkwardly and left within minutes. Through the window, I watched them argue in the driveway, gesturing wildly toward the house. The next morning, I visited First National Bank, where Robert and I had been clients for decades. With Evelyn's guidance, I restructured my accounts, not blocking access entirely, but requiring my physical presence for significant transactions. That afternoon, I completed a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation, storing Thersalts with my legal team, ammunition against any potential claims of incompetence. In the evening, I attended my first financial literacy workshop at the community center. The County Social Services Department offered monthly seminars on protecting personal assets. There, I met Elaine Winters, a widow who'd faced similar manipulation. My son-in-law had me halfway to signing over my house before I realized what was happening, she confided during the coffee break. People think it only happens to the very elderly or confused, but it's about vulnerability, not age. When Eric called the following week about an unmissable investment opportunity that required a temporary loan, I was prepared. "I'm under financial advisement now," I replied calmly. "We can discuss this with Leonard present if it's truly important." The silence on the line was deafening. Then, "Never mind. It's not a good fit anyway." I hung up and added the interaction to my growing documentation file. The invisible woman was becoming increasingly visible and increasingly formidable. That night, I sorted through old photographs, rediscovering the woman I used to be, the HR director who'd mediated conflicts and managed difficult personalities. That woman wasn't gone. She'd just been sleeping. "The manipulation often follows a pattern," Harriet Johnson explained to our support group. The community room at First Presbyterian Church was filled with afternoon light and nodding heads. They isolate, then infantilize, then begin suggesting financial solutions that primarily benefit them. It was mid-April, 6 months since Robert's death. My friendship with Elaine had led me to this bi-weekly gathering, people facing family pressures in their later years. George Miller, a retired accountant with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. "My son did the same thing. Started with 'Dad, you're getting confused,' and ended with trying to get power of attorney." I found myself sharing parts of my story, the words coming easier each time. "My daughter films lifestyle videos about authentic living while plotting to sell my home out from under me." Unexpected laughter rippled through the room, not at the betrayal, but at the irony we all recognized. After the meeting, James, Diane's husband, texted asking to meet privately. We arranged lunch at a cafe in the next town over. "Something's not right with Diane," he confided, fidgeting with his wedding band. "We had plans to adopt. For years, that's all she talked about. Now suddenly it's boutiques and business ventures. She keeps moving our financial goalposts." I studied his face, the genuine confusion, the hurt. "How can I help?" I found messages between her and Thomas, her ex. "They're planning something together." His voice cracked. "A business," she says. "But why the secrecy?" I offered emotional support without revealing my investigation. James was potentially both victim and ally. That evening, Barbara Chen delivered her preliminary report. Eric's gambling debts had consumed his inheritance and more. Diane was indeed planning a boutique with Thomas, using capital she expected from the sale of my home. "We need more concrete evidence about their intentions," Barbara advised, "and we need to understand what triggered this behavior." I nodded, remembering Robert's journal entries. "Keep digging." Later that night, I sat on my porch swing, Robert's favorite spot. For the first time, I felt something beyond determination or anger. I felt sadness for the people my children had become, wondering where we'd gone wrong. My phone chimed with a message from Elaine. "Remember, protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary." I watched fireflies emerge in the spring twilight, realizing I was no longer just reacting to my children's schemes. I was reclaiming pieces of myself long surrendered to family roles. The next move would be mine. The bank manager's office was hushed, air conditioning humming softly against the July heat. "Mrs. Sullivan, we located the safe deposit box you inquired about." She placed a register before me. "Your husband maintained this box separately from your joint accounts." My signature trembled slightly as I provided the necessary identification. The small metal box felt surprisingly heavy in my hands. Inside, I found what Barbara had suspected might exist: more detailed documentation of Robert's concerns. A comprehensive letter explained how he'd tried to help Eric with gambling debts 3 times, only to discover the pattern continuing. Email printouts showed Diane repeatedly changing life plans, from teaching to adoption to business ventures, always with increasing financial demands. "I've tried talking to them," Robert had written. "They convince me they're improving, then revert to the same behaviors. I hired financial counselors for both, but they refused the help." I sat motionless, imagining Robert's silent struggle, trying to protect me while dealing with his disappointment alone. Back home, I spread the documents across our dining table where Leonard and Barbara joined me. "This gives us everything we need," Leonard confirmed. Not to punish them, but to create a protection framework that allows for potential reconciliation. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Patrick Anderson, a former colleague from my brief teaching career at the community college before I devoted myself to family life. "Martha, I just heard about Robert. I've been overseas on a teaching fellowship. I'm so sorry." His familiar voice unlocked memories of intellectual discussions and shared passions for literature and education, aspects of my identity I'd almost forgotten. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked. "Catch up properly?" For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of something like anticipation. "I'd like that." The next morning, Barbara delivered her final report. Detailed financial analyses showing Eric's mounting gambling debts and documentation of meetings between Diane and Thomas, discussing a business that would require significant family investment. With all the pieces finally in place, I contacted Evelyn to schedule the meeting I'd been preparing for since January. The confrontation would be difficult, but necessary, not just for my protection, but perhaps for my children's redemption as well. That night, I stood in Robert's closet, still filled with his clothes. I pressed my face against his favorite sweater, inhaling the fading scent of him. "I understand now," I whispered, "why you couldn't tell me everything, why you tried to handle it alone." I was done being invisible, done being a problem to solve. Tomorrow, I would become something they never expected, a force to be reckoned with. "Thank you all for coming." My voice was steady as I surveyed the faces around Evelyn Taylor's conference table. Eric's usual confidence had dimmed to nervous fidgeting. Diane sat ramrod straight, her social media persona firmly in place despite the tension. James watched his wife with newfound wariness. Mr. Jenkins observed quietly from the corner. 9 months had passed since Robert's death. 9 months of planning, documenting, and strategic patience. "I've asked you here to discuss my future and our family relationship going forward," I continued. "This is Evelyn Taylor, my primary attorney." Evelyn nodded professionally. "Mrs. Sullivan has spent considerable time analyzing her financial and personal situation." I leaned forward, meeting each of my children's eyes directly. "Robert worried about you both. He tried repeatedly to help you develop healthier financial habits. The trust conditions aren't punishment. They're his final attempt to guide you." Their expressions shifted from annoyance to alarm as I methodically revealed my knowledge of Eric's gambling debts and Diane's secret business plans with Thomas. "I'm not here to judge or control your lives," I clarified. "I'm here to protect my future and perhaps help you reconsider your priorities." Mr. Jenkins explained Robert's conditions. Funds would be released only after demonstrating financial stability and consistent family values, or for legitimate medical emergencies. Gambling addiction, Eric, qualifies as a medical condition eligible for treatment support. Eric paled visibly. Diane began protesting, claiming privacy invasion. I presented the evidence gathered over months, not as accusation, but as reflection of our reality. "This is illegal," Diane snapped, her composed facade crumbling. "You had no right to investigate us." "Everything was obtained through legal channels," Evelyn replied calmly. "Public records, observation of public meetings, interviews with willing parties." James watched his wife with growing disbelief as details of her plans with Thomas emerged. After the meeting, he approached me privately. "Can we talk later?" I nodded, recognizing the pain in his eyes, the same shock of betrayal I'd experienced months ago. As the group dispersed, Eric lingered behind. "Why didn't Dad just tell us how he felt?" His voice held genuine confusion. "He tried," I answered gently, "but you weren't ready to hear it. Maybe now you are." That evening, alone in my garden, I watched hummingbirds dart between flowers Robert had planted. For the first time, I felt not just strength, but clarity. The confrontation wasn't an end, but a beginning, a difficult, necessary first step toward potential healing. My phone lit up with a text from James. "Thank you for your honesty today. Can we meet tomorrow?" I replied with a time and place, understanding that the web of secrets was finally unraveling. The next phase would be even harder, determining what, if anything, could be salvaged from the wreckage of trust. I found messages between Diane and Thomas 6 months ago. James stirred his coffee absently, shadows under his eyes. We sat in a quiet corner of Riverside Park, September leaves drifting around us. They were discussing store locations, financing, all while she told me we were saving for adoption. I watched a jogger pass by, giving us momentary privacy. I've observed you two over the years. There was a time when Diane spoke about adoption with the same enthusiasm you still have. I believe somewhere beneath the ambition and materialism that Diane still exists. James looked up, hope and skepticism warring in his expression. You think we can fix this? I think it's worth trying before making irreversible decisions, I replied carefully. Consider counseling, not just for her, but for both of you. 3 days later, Eric appeared at my door, unshaven and haggard. They're threatening legal action, he admitted, collapsing into a kitchen chair. The creditors, I can't cover it anymore. Your father tried to help you so many times, I said, pouring him tea. I know. His voice cracked. I always thought I could win it all back with one big bet, fix everything without anyone knowing how bad it got. Despite everything, my heart ached for my son, the little boy who'd collected baseball cards and built elaborate forts, now lost in a maze of addiction. Dad anticipated this, Eric. He wanted you to get help, not punishment. Through Mr. Jenkins, we began arranging an intensive treatment program for Eric's gambling addiction with parallel financial counseling. Not a bailout, but a pathway to recovery. Meanwhile, Diane reacted defensively to losing control. She and Susan attempted to question my mental capacity with Mr. Patterson, the original family attorney. Patterson, already aware of the complete situation through professional communications with Evelyn, explained the legal protections established and suggested Diane reconsider her approach. When James confronted her with evidence of her secret plans, Diane finally broke down. I just wanted to succeed at something of my own, she confessed. Everyone always admired Dad and his career. I wanted to prove my worth. This vulnerability created space for honest dialogue between the couple for the first time in years. On the anniversary of Robert's death, I revisited all the letters and documents I'd found. Among them was a final note from Robert I hadn't yet opened. The true inheritance we leave isn't material assets, but values and love. When they're ready for that inheritance, forgive them. Not for them, but for yourself. I traced his handwriting with my fingertip, feeling the weight of his final wisdom. The path forward wouldn't be simple, but for the first time, I could see its possibility. That evening, Patrick and I attended a community theater performance, my first social outing that wasn't family-related or strategic in months. Sitting in the darkened theater, I felt Robert's absence, but also a new presence. The woman I was becoming, stronger and more complete than the one who had stood by that grave a year ago. Before we eat, I'd like to say something. I looked around my Thanksgiving table at the faces gathered there. Eric, now 2 months into recovery, his features clearer than they'd been in years. Diane and James, still navigating therapy but present together. Elaine, and 2 friends from the support group who'd become dear to me. Patrick, whose friendship continued to blossom into something unexpected and warming. 14 months had passed since Robert's death. The dining room, once a battleground of subtle manipulations, now held a tentative peace. With Evelyn and Mr. Jenkins' guidance, I'm establishing a scholarship in Robert's name at the community college, focusing on family financial education. I explained how the program would honor Robert's commitment to family stability while offering tools for others to avoid our challenges. You're welcome to participate if you wish, I told my children. Not as an obligation, but as an opportunity for growth. Eric, humbled by recent experiences, expressed interest immediately. Diane, still processing the consequences of her actions on her marriage, asked for time to consider. I brought out a photo album showing happier times, community projects we'd done when the children were young. Before pressures and expectations, we were a family that valued more than material possessions. I believe we can find that balance again, even if the journey is long. The conversation that followed was difficult, but honest. Eric spoke openly about his addiction and self-deception. Diane, still somewhat defensive but trying, acknowledged her obsession with status and external approval. James shared his pain and hope for rebuilding. As the evening ended, I gave each child a copy of Robert's final letter. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the past, but choosing not to let it define our future. Weeks later, on Christmas Eve, I received encouraging news. Eric had completed his initial treatment phase and was taking responsibility for his debts. Diane and James had honestly discussed adoption, reconsidering their plans. Small steps, but significant ones. That night, alone on my porch watching the season's first snow, I reflected on my journey. I hadn't merely survived loss and betrayal. I'd rediscovered my strength and purpose. "It wasn't exactly as you planned, Robert," I whispered, "but we're finding our way." For the first time since his death, I felt not just peace, but genuine hope for the future. A future I now had the strength and wisdom to shape on my own terms. The woman they'd tried to make invisible had become impossible to ignore. Not through cruelty or vengeance, but through patient strategy and the quiet power of truth. My vindication wasn't in punishment, but in offering the chance for growth, recognizing that true redemption happens not in a single moment, but through continuous choices of repair and reconciliation. In the end, Robert's last wish wasn't about money or property. It was about restoration, of dignity, of family, of the values that matter most when everything else falls away. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.